here is familiar with the Xbox One, that the Xbox One actually does have an HDMI input in it. And really the whole focus behind that was they wanted you to put your cable box through that, and it would extract all the data from your cable box, and you could talk to it and all that good stuff. But if you notice here that in step number 7, there is no Xbox that says select device with inputs. So it would actually be impossible for us to let Accelerator create that macro for us. So what we're going to do is we're, of course, going to fix that in the driver creation here. That's the first thing we're going to do. Then if I bring you over to step number 10, under Edit Device Layouts, we're going to go ahead and find our Xbox here. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, by all means, just type them in the question box, and I will answer them as we go along here. It'll be a lot easier than answering them later on. So in step number 10, under Edit Device Layouts, you'll notice I brought up the Xbox here. And like I mentioned, all of these codes are right. They'll all work. That's great. But there's a lot of stuff here that as an installer as well as a customer would drive you insane. So right off the bat here, you'll notice the skip forward and skip back. First of all, they're on different pages. And second of all, if you're familiar with our remotes at all, you'll know that we do have a skip forward and skip back hard button. So the menu pages up here are all your soft buttons, and on the bottom here we have all of our hard buttons. And you will notice that we do have a skip forward and skip back, and you'll also notice that they are blank. So that's something that we're going to want to fix as well. If you are familiar with Accelerator, of course you know that you can, of course, drag and drop these down here, and that will fix your problem. But two things are going to be wrong with that, and why I would advise you guys not to do that. The first one is you'll notice that now you have 2 blank buttons up there on the screen that, of course, you'd have to fix. And number 2, this will only fix it for this specific project. You would have to do this for every single time you added this Xbox One driver. So what we're going to do today is we're going to fix this in the actual driver creation, so that way it will look and work exactly the way you want it to every single time. Now, another thing you're going to notice here under page 1 is that you have some discrete commands for Xbox Nexus, videos, pictures, and music. So those are discrete commands, which means that if you obviously press them, they'll go directly to that source. So that's something that we're also going to touch on in the driver as well, and I will obviously reference other devices instead of just the Xbox One. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up this Xbox One driver, the same exact driver that I'm using here. So I'm just going to go up to my database, create a new driver, and find that driver. So Xbox One is IR. It's under Auxiliary, Microsoft, and then there is Xbox One. So I'm going to select this device, and you are going to get this pop-up. Now, if you're editing a URC driver, then this checkbox or this radio button will always be correct. You won't have to change this here. But if you are creating a driver from scratch, this is extremely important. So I usually work from the bottom up here. You'll notice that if it's a matrix switcher of any kind, if it's audio or video, you'll always choose the bottom option. If it's an AVR or a soundbar, basically anything that has zones accompanied with it or affiliated with it, it'll be the middle option here. And then essentially if it's anything else that you're creating, it'll be a general device, the first option up there. This is extremely important that you do this correctly, because if you don't, Accelerator is going to create your macros incorrectly, and obviously you don't want that to happen. So we're going to leave it as general device. As I mentioned, URC's already created this driver for us, so it's fine. So we're just going to go ahead and click on next, and that'll pop open my driver window here. So there's a lot of stuff going on in here. I'm going to go in order of how I create a driver, my process for when I add a brand new device or something like that. So we're going to go along that path. So first and foremost, you have the brand. Of course, if it's a URC driver, it'll already be populated for you here. If it was a blank driver, then obviously you'd put your brand in here. The next option is models. Now you'll notice that you do have an option to add devices there, and a lot of people ask why. Well, if you are familiar with programming, either complete control or total control, you'll know that a lot of times you find yourself asking yourself, hey, URC doesn't have the brand new model for this Samsung TV or whatever the case may be, and you find yourself just using the latest driver that we have for the year previous TV or whatever the case may be. Well, as you continue to program, longer and longer, and the weeks and months and years go by, you're obviously either not going to remember or you don't want to find yourself guessing. So something that I would do here is I would just simply click add and add another device that this specific driver works for. So for example, this driver does work for the Xbox One S. So when I created this, I would go in here, hit add, and hit OK. So that way I know when I show up or when I install an Xbox One or a One S, I can choose the actual model and it will work for that specific device. I'm not guessing and checking anymore. Under the device type category, this is simply where you're going to find your driver in the program. So as you noticed before, when I clicked on new driver, I went to the IR category, I went to auxiliary, and I found it. So this is just under auxiliary. Obviously, if you're making a driver from scratch, I would obviously put it in the correct category, but it's completely up to you. The default submenu here, this is where you're going to have this device show up after you accelerate. So when you accelerate Xbox, of course, we want it under entertainment. When you're creating a driver from scratch, this is obviously going to say none, and you're going to have to decide on where you want it to go. 90% of the time, you're really going to just be creating either entertainment or music. But if you do come across thermostats or something like that, you, of course, have those options there as well. In the control types down here, when you hit edit, you'll notice that we do have the option to choose all three protocols. The two-way advanced modules, that is only going to be used if you are writing two-way modules for us or for yourself. But if you're unfamiliar with that, don't worry about that at all. Most 99% of you are going to just strictly deal with the normal device module here. So what this does, you'll ask, why can I have three different protocols? Well, just for the example of today's webinar, I'm going to check all three of these just so you guys can see what it does. Of course, Xbox can only be controlled IR, but I just want to make you guys familiar with what this is going to look like. Essentially, what this does is you are able to save either 1, 2, or 3 different drivers into one saved file. It's really just an organizational thing. That way, in your computer, you don't have to save the file as, Xbox One IR, Xbox One RS-232. It'll all be saved in one file, and Accelerator will obviously pull the correct one when you choose the protocol in step number 4. So I'm going to leave these checks just to show you guys what's going on here today. So we'll click OK. You'll notice that in the control types, it does populate all three of them. Now, on the right of that, you'll notice we have two brand new fields here. They're fairly new, about 3-4 months old at this point. The first one here is project tree name. So right now, a lot of you may be familiar with adding devices to your programs from the database, and you have to right-click on it and rename it so that it will look exactly the way you want it to or the exact way the customer wants it to. Well, we know that that obviously takes time, not much time, but obviously the more devices you have, the longer that's going to take. So we added this project tree name here where you can make it whatever you want, so you can customize what you want it to look like in the project tree, and obviously that means it will look however you want it to look on the actual interface. So just to give you an example here, if we were doing something like DirecTV, in the model section, I would obviously type the models of the DirecTV box, so HR 24, 34, 54, whatever the case may be. And then in the project tree name, I would type in what I want the customer to see. So I would either put in, satellite or DirecTV. Now, under icon, if you hit edit here, you can actually attach an icon that you want to use for this driver. That way you don't have to change it in step number 14. This will obviously save you a ton of time if you're familiar with our graphics. So you are able to choose the device if it has internal sources, and right now the Xbox does not. And then, of course, you can choose the graphic itself. So if you hit select image here, it'll show you all of our graphics that we have. If you have the expansion pack, whatever the case may be, you can hit apply to it, and it will, of course, attach to this specific driver. So let's move on to the right-hand side here. We start with the outputs. Because we chose a general device, you'll always have one output. As I mentioned before, if it was a multi-zone thing, it would obviously be the second one. And if it was a matrix switch of any kind, that means it would be the third option there when we first started the driver. The two-way field over here, like I said, you don't have to worry about that unless you're creating two-way modules. 99% of you will never touch that field. Now in the middle here, you have power management and macro delays. And this is where you're going to start to customize the device so that your macros are created identically to what you want. So for example, the power on delay. Essentially what you're asking yourself is, how long does it take this device to turn on? Now I personally know that I set my Xbox One to about 5 seconds, because when you turn the Xbox One on, it does have to log you into Xbox Live, so on and so forth. So after 5 seconds, it's pretty much good to go, and you can start working. Now, this is obviously extremely important for major things like TVs and projectors. We all know that both of those take a long time to turn on before you can send input switches and things like that. So you want to make sure you take the time out, actually test the device, find out how long it takes to turn on before you can send it a command and input that into this field here. Now the power off delay means, of course, how long does it take to turn off before you can turn it back on. Now 99% of the devices, you're really going to just leave this as 0.5, or you can even shrink it down to 0.1 if you want to make your macros faster. Really the only thing that I use this for is if you're using a projector that needs to be off for a certain amount of time before you can turn it back on. So that's really the only thing I use the power off delay for. And then the macro interstep delay, not really used. It's really for things that you're adding multiple commands to in a device. So for example, if you did an input switch on a TV and then you did a discrete command for the smart hub or something like that, that's what this would be used for. Other than that, it's not used for in-between devices. This is only for commands that are in between the same device. So now is where we're going to get to the part where we're going to actually start customizing this Xbox driver. And as I mentioned before, this driver code-wise will work absolutely perfectly fine, but there is a lot of stuff missing. So I'm going to talk about this Xbox One driver because obviously that's what we have open, but I am going to reference some other devices as well that you guys may be a little more familiar with. So for example, down here, we have analog digital input. Now you'll notice that there's nothing in there. Now I mentioned to you guys before when I first started this webinar that the Xbox One does have an HDMI input. And you notice that in step number 7, there was no available HDMI input on the Xbox One. And that's because there's nothing in this section here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click edit, and I'm going to add the input. Okay, now all we're doing here is we're just adding a placeholder. We're of course going to have to add the command to this in the next step, but right now we're adding placeholders. So now if I just scratch the Xbox One for a second, let's talk about stuff that you guys may be a little more familiar with, like a TV or an AVR. If your TV driver or if your AVR driver was missing an input, whether it's an analog input, an HDMI input, a composite input, whatever the case may be, if you were missing any code or any input whatsoever, this is where you would add it. So if you picked a Sony TV driver that had 4 inputs, but your TV has 6 inputs, this is where you would add them. You'd simply click edit, add, type in HDMI 7 and 6, and then of course we'll add the code in the next step. But this is where you set up all of your placeholders. Now the next one over here says built-in sources. And once again, you'll notice that there is nothing in here. And as I pointed out in step number 10, that the Xbox One does have internal sources. It does have discrete internal sources. It had that Xbox radio, it had Xbox pictures, videos, music, it had all that stuff. And those are discrete commands, which means that we can actually utilize them. So if your customer says to you, you know, I really use Xbox Music all the time. I really don't like hitting the play Xbox button and then pressing Xbox Music. Well, they don't have to do that. We can add all of our built-in sources here. So I'm going to add 2 of them so you guys can see how this is done. I'll just add Xbox Music, and I will add Xbox Pictures. And once again, these are placeholders. We're going to, of course, add the commands to this in the next step. And once again, let me give you guys a reference on something that you may be a little more familiar with. Let's talk about a TV or an AVR. If you had a smart TV that you utilize Netflix or Hulu or something like that, and they had discrete commands, you would throw the built-in source in here. So we would type in Netflix or Hulu or whatever the case is. And essentially what will happen is instead of just making the customer an Xbox button or a TV button on the interface, they will have a Netflix button under entertainment or Hulu button under entertainment. And then that way, this is telling the system, hey, Accelerator, we know where Netflix is. We know that it's in the Xbox or whatever device you're using, and we know all the connections already, so we can, of course, make you this macro. We don't need you to go into the device and then click the button. So only if it's discrete, that's very, very important. If you have a TV that you have to hit, you know, Smart Hub and then go up, down, left, right in order to get to it, to the Netflix button, that's not going to work. But if you do have discrete buttons for any internal sources, that's this will be where you put it in order for it to automatically create your macros. And then, of course, that also holds true for your AVRs. If you have an AVR that has Pandora, Sirius, whatever the case is, you can, of course, add them in here as well. So now we basically made the template for this driver. We're going to go up here and go to Edit Functions. And this is where we're actually going to go ahead and start customizing our driver for operational use. So first and foremost, you noticed before when I clicked on IR, IP, and RS-232, I told you that it was going to make 3 separate drivers into one. So you'll notice up here we do have the option for all 3 of them. Obviously, you'll notice IP and RS-232 are blank. There are no commands for those. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So we're obviously going to stay in the IR section here. Now, the first thing we have here is default repeat value. Now, this comes from the manufacturer. Obviously, if you open a URC driver, this will be correct. If you're making a driver from scratch, you're going to have to get this from the manufacturer. This checkbox here, repeat while button is pressed, this has to do with ramping. Now, the Xbox One, we don't really care if it ramps. We're not doing any volume or channel ramping on the actual Xbox One. But if you had an AVR or a cable box maybe that you hold down the channel button, something like that, make sure this checkbox is checked in order to activate ramping. Now, if it's something that you don't want the entire remote to ramp, let's say you just want the volume to ramp but not the channels, you can simply click on the custom option next to the actual command. So here's volume. I can click on edit function, and you'll notice that that specific code is set to repeat while button is pressed. So this is more of a global setting. This is more of a individual code setting. Now, in the for testing window, if you've ever been to one of our trainings before, we always tell you that you never want to use the testing in step number 4 because we always advise you to use your custom drivers. So we always want to use the for testing window here. Because this is an IR driver, we of course can test it 2 ways. We can test it through the base station. And my personal advice is if your system is completely set up, all your IR emitters are ran already, I would absolutely test it through the actual base station. If you're just testing it, setting it up for the first time and none of your system is set up, you do have the option for testing through the PIR1, which is our IR learner and tester. Okay, so that's going to bring us to the bottom here. I'm going to go through customizing this driver the exact way that I would customize my own personal driver. So for example, the first thing I do is I go to the show column here. and I simply go through this and I decide what codes does my customer need to see or not see. So for example, power on and power off. Well, they might need that at some point if they just want to turn the Xbox on or off. So I'm going to leave those two there. But the one that screams out at me here is the third one, the power toggle, for two reasons. One, I just told you that we have discrete commands for power on and power off. So power toggle would obviously be pointless. And then third, or second, I should say, there is no function data in here, meaning this code doesn't even exist. So all I would do is uncheck this. I just took it away from my customer. It doesn't exist. It's good to go. So what I would do at this point is I would scroll through this entire driver and I would see what the customer needs or doesn't need. If they don't need it, I uncheck it. If they need it, I leave it checked. Now, a very important thing that I always tell every single class is that you never want to delete something from a driver. So for example, 90% of you probably don't give your customers access to the 99 surround sound modes on an AVR. Okay, most of us do not. So what most people do, well, they'll automatically come in this driver, they'll find the surround sound modes, and they'll hit delete. Well, if you delete it, then that means as an installer or as a programmer, you are not going to have access to those codes either. So if you want to take them away from the customer, all you want to do is uncheck them so that the customer can't see them. They don't have access to them, but that way you'll still have access to them as the programmer. You can still put them in macros or toggle buttons or whatever you want to use. So pretty much the rule of thumb is don't ever delete anything from a driver. If you need to get rid of it, just uncheck it. Okay, under the function display here, this is what is going to be shown on the physical interface. So down here, you're going to notice we have common buttons. And the common buttons are what shows up on the actual screen. So let's say when we add this driver, you don't want the, I don't know, let's see. Maybe you don't want skip backwards to say that. Maybe you want it to say skip minus, if that's your thing. You change it, you hit enter. Now when you accelerate, that's what's going to show up on the screen, not what originally was set. So that's really more of a customization thing, really up to you, of course, or the customer. Now we're going to go ahead and address the skip forward and skip back buttons. Okay, as I showed you guys before, the skip forward and skip back buttons were on the main screen. They were not on the hard buttons that we, of course, have. So on the left here, you'll notice that we have some things under the button ID category. And if it has actual names in there or button names in there, that means that it's mapped to a physical hard button. So you'll obviously we have a play button, we have a stop button, so on and so forth. If you scroll a little farther down, if you see that we have a common button, if it's labeled a common button, that means that it's found on the actual screen. Those are your soft buttons. So as I showed you guys before, the skip forward and skip back were both found on the screen. Skip forward and skip back were common buttons. And I can prove that to you guys just by scrolling down here. You'll notice there's our skip forward. There's our skip minus that I just changed before. Okay. So those are common buttons. And we, of course, want to move them to the hard buttons. So I'm going to do this the way most installers do it so that I can show you the mistake that everyone makes. And then they call tech support and tell us that it's broken. So, for example, I want the skip backwards button to, of course, be on the skip backwards hard button. So I would click on common. I would find the button ID for skip backwards, which here it is, skip previous. I'll click it, and you'll notice nothing's going to happen. Okay, and why would that be? Well, if we scroll up here, you'll notice that the skip next and skip previous buttons are already assigned to a hard button. Now, even though there's no commands in here, they are still assigned. So we can't assign two different commands to the same hard button. Obviously, a hard button can only have one command on it. So what we need to do is we need to unassign these. So we'll make them common buttons. And then we'll say to ourselves, well, first of all, there's no codes in here. Second of all, They definitely don't need to see these. So we'll uncheck them. And now I can go down to skip forward. I can go to skip next, and I can go skip back and skip previous. And you'll notice now they let me assign them. And now what this means is when I accelerate with this driver, my skip buttons are now forever and always going to be on the skip forward and skip back hard buttons, not on your screen. And obviously this will be saved, so it will happen forever. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to talk about reordering functions. So when I showed you guys step number 10, you guys saw a couple things. You guys saw Xbox pictures, music, radio, all that stuff right on the front page. And you know if you've ever used an Xbox, the most common buttons you're ever going to use are your letter buttons, your A, your X, B, and Y. So why wouldn't we want those there? Now, could you fix this in step number 10? Absolutely. Could you drag and drop them? Sure. But of course, you're going to have to do that every single time. So if you come in the driver here and you click reorder functions, you're going to get every single common button that is in this driver. And you'll notice that every 6 of them are colored differently. So the first 6 here, of course, your page 1, your next 6 are page 2, so on and so forth. Okay, and the numbers next to them, they relay to the layout order over here. So if you want a button on the top left, you would obviously make it number 1, and so on and so forth. So you can go ahead, you can drag and drop these. So let's just use this real life example. I want all of my letter buttons to be the first 4 buttons on my screen. So I'll move them up here. Okay, you can customize it however you want. You hit apply, and now every single time you accelerate with this driver, it will go ahead and look exactly how you want it to look every single time. So you see how if you spend a couple minutes on this driver, you're going to be obviously saving yourself a ton of time at the actual customer's programming or their house or programming, wherever you're programming. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the things that we added. So over here on the left, you'll notice the input sections. We added 3 inputs. We added the HDMI input, and we also added our 2 internal sources, Xbox Music and Xbox Pictures. So the first thing we're going to look at is the HDMI in. Okay, now the HDMI in for Xbox One, there is no code. But if this was a TV or if this was a receiver or something like that, obviously the HDMI in would need a code, and you would have to put it in here. So how do we put it in here? Well, I'm going to show you how to do that with Xbox Music and Pictures. So these are our internal sources. And the first thing I always ask the class is, of course, does URC have the codes for Xbox Music and Xbox Pictures? And I showed you guys that in step number 10 that we absolutely do. Now, in case you didn't know, you can, of course, scroll through here and look. Hey, is there Xbox Music Pictures in here? Yeah, there they are, right here. Okay? Now, these are on the screen. Now, I don't want to get rid of these commands because if I'm playing Xbox and I want to go to pictures or videos, I obviously still want these on the screen. Okay, you definitely still want those commands there. You don't want to move them. You don't want to delete them. You want to keep them there. But what we do want is we do want the same exact code in here so that Accelerator can automatically make us a macro for those, and we don't have to open up the Xbox macro. So how would we do that? Well, we can't copy and paste IR commands because you obviously cannot see the raw commands here. So that would be impossible. But you do know that URC has those commands. So for the first time, what you guys are going to do is you're going to go up here to IR Navigator. And what this is going to give you is this is going to give you the raw command for every single device that URC has. So all we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and open up the same driver that we're working with here. So we're going to open up Microsoft Xbox One. And this is the same exact driver that we're playing with on this side, except these are just the raw commands, not the driver. So you'll see Xbox Music. Oops, there goes my navigator. So you'll see Xbox Music. I'll find Xbox Music. I'll drag and drop it over. There's that one. And now my pictures. And there's that one. So basically what I just did was I essentially copy and pasted it, but you have to do it this way because you cannot paste our IR command from the actual driver. So you can also mix and match devices in here. Maybe you guys wanted to make a button from the TV. You wanted a, whatever the case may be, input switch or surround sound modes. Maybe you wanted to put a surround sound mode button inside the Xbox. You could do that. Okay, so that's adding our internal sources and our HDMI inputs. Now the next thing we're going to go to is, this is all, everything I've spoke about is that URC owns the command for it or has the command for it. But what do we do if we don't have it? Well, we have two options. Okay, the first option is, of course, learning the remote. Okay, so if we had the manufacturer's remote, we would go to a command that's not here. So let's just, here, guide. So guide isn't here. So if we wanted to learn this command, I would go up here to learn. And it's going to ask me to connect the PIR1. Now, once you do that, it's going to pop open a screen that says learn ready. You'll point the manufacturer's remote at the PIR1. You'll press the guide button. It will say learn OK, and the window will go away. Very, very simple. Now, if you're learning, let's say, a whole device, let's say we have 0 codes for a device, and you need to start from scratch. Here, we'll just make believe this is it. You have a blank device. You want to learn it from scratch. You would simply click on the top command, click Learn Next, which you'll notice it goes orange, so it'll be activated. And now when you click on Learn, it's going to learn the first command, automatically take you to the second command. You'll learn that command, you go to the third command, so on and so forth. That way you don't have to keep clicking on Learn. So it'll speed up the process a little bit there. And then the last thing you need to learn about Learn is, of course, one-time learn versus two-time learn. Okay, so if you've ever learned a device and it's only worked 50% of the time, this would be your reason why. 2 times learn. So 2 times learn exists for something that we used to, or that used to be around a lot, which is what we call a toggle bit command or an NEC IR code. And what that means is the same button does 2 different things. So one of the examples I always use is, back in the day, we used to have AVRs that would just have a standby button. Standby once would, of course, turn the device on. Standby twice would, of course, turn the device off. So if you did that, that's what we call a toggle bit. So if you were to learn it one time, well, of course, we're only going to get the either turn on or turn off side of that IR command. In that case, you'd have to use 2 times learn. That way we would get both commands. We'd get the standby on and standby off. Now, my personal advice and opinion is I use 2 times learn for everything, because if it's not an NEC code or it's not a toggle bit command and we learn it twice, it doesn't hurt you at all. So instead of going to Google, or instead of looking at the manufacturer's book or something like that to figure out if it's an NEC command, I just learn everything as an NEC code, 2 times learn, and call it a day. Now, the last thing we have to show you here is, I've showed you if URC owns the command or if you have the manufacturer's remote. Well, what happens if you don't have the manufacturer's remote, and what happens if URC doesn't have the command? Well, in that case, we can go ahead and go to our lovely friends at remotecentral.com. Okay, so URC uses a protocol called Pronto hex code. So what I'm going to show you is how you would get a command. Now I'm just going to show you a random command here because we don't need one for Xbox. So the way to get to this would be under Files. It would be under Device Command Library. You would scroll down to Discrete Infrared Hex Codes, and then choose the manufacturer that you need. So I'll just choose Apple. And this is what a Pronto hex code looks like. So what you would do is you would copy that entire string of letters and numbers, and then you would come back to Accelerator. And let's just make believe that we need to put this here. You would simply open up the universal browser, click on hex, because that's what we just copied, paste in the Pronto hex code that we just copied, and simply drag it to the command. Once you do that, of course, it will be saved in your driver. Now, another tip that I will tell you is I, as an installer, will always use the Pronto hex codes over the learning device. Because when you learn something, if you've ever learned a manufacturer's remote before, you know there's a lot of factors in there. The lighting can affect it. If it's a long command, sometimes that affects it, things like that. If you use the Pronto hex code, this is the raw command, meaning it can't be wrong. It will be learned in the correct way every single time. So that's my advice to you. Now, as you noticed, let me bring that back up real quick. This is a Pronto hex code. There's a lot of different types of hex codes out there, okay? Accelerator will only use the Pronto hex code. So in order to get these Pronto hex codes, maybe Remote Central doesn't have it, okay? But you can always go to things like the manufacturer's website. And I'm just going to pull up a random thing here. But if you go to a whatever manufacturer you need, right? If you needed a matrix switcher driver and URC doesn't have it, if you go to the actual web page of the device, now this usually holds true for AVRs, matrix switchers, and projectors. Very popular for those three. If you scroll down and you find the downloads tab here, you'll notice that there is something in here called IR hex protocol, okay, or serial, or whatever the case may be, whatever you're looking for. And it will bring up, once it opens here, what the code set should look like for this specific device. So there's your Pronto hex codes. Now, if we didn't have this driver, which URC does, but if we didn't, and you needed to create this entire matrix switcher driver by yourself, this is how you would do it. You'd create a driver from scratch, you'd copy over your Pronto hex code, you'd come over here and paste it in. Oops. You'd go ahead and paste it in, you drag it over, and you'd start creating your driver. That will obviously take you some time to do, but it will work. Now, if the manufacturer's website doesn't have the Pronto hex codes, because Pronto hex code, the protocol is actually pretty old. Most people just use hex codes now, or decimal codes, or whatever the case is. Well, if you go to the URC control room, our lovely friends over at Yamaha, if you go to the More tab, and you go to NEC-IR to Pronto hex converter, our lovely friends at Yamaha created this converter for us. So you'll notice that this, of course, says normal NEC-IR command. This says 16-bit. This says 32, so on and so forth. The only Pronto hex code you can add to Accelerator, as I mentioned, is a Pronto hex code. So if you go to the control room and you open up this, let's say the manufacturer gives you this code. All you do is paste it in here, hit generate, and it will give you the Pronto hex code that now you can go ahead and add to Accelerator, like so. Okay, you cannot put regular NEC codes in here. We have a question here. Okay, we have a question. The question is concerning hex code. Should you remove spaces after the last code? Also, the switcher command appeared to have line breaks. Okay, great question, Thomas. For the spaces, yes, you definitely want to make sure there's no spaces at the end of the command. So if you pasted or you accidentally copied one extra character, you would absolutely want to get rid of that. And for the matrix switcher, yes, it does have line breaks. If the manufacturer gives it to you like that, you should leave it the way they give it to you. The reason for that is normally it will that matrix switcher will do two things at once. It will do output and input at the same time, so you should leave the line break in there. But really, if it's coming from the manufacturer, leave it exactly the way it is, simple copy and paste. Okay, so this tool is very useful. These are the 4 different types of hex codes or NEC codes that you may see out there. Some of the resources I just showed you, to get them, go to the manufacturer's website or go to Remote Central. If both of those fail, if you ever call the manufacturer of the device itself, all you have to do is just ask for the hex codes for that device. Usually tech support will shoot you over a PDF or an Excel spreadsheet of all of the hex codes that for that specific device. So if anyone has any questions, by all means, type it in the box. That essentially is how easy it is to make drivers. What I will show you here is just what a RS-232 driver looks like and an IP driver. So for example, I showed you IR. The data in the IR driver, of course, showed you that every single command just said IR. You'll notice for RS-232 and IP, there is actual data in here. And remember I mentioned before that an IR command you couldn't copy and paste within the driver? Well, RS-232 and IP devices, since these are raw commands, they are actual data, you can copy and paste these wherever you want. So if you need to add another button for it or whatever the case may be, you can copy and paste those throughout the driver. I have a question here. Is this webinar recorded for later viewing? Yes, it will be. It is being recorded right now. It'll be added to the control room and the YouTube channel that you can access it whenever you would like. And we're also going to be giving the same webinar as well at 12 o'clock. So if you came in a little late or anything like that, it will be there for you as well, 12 Eastern, of course. Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll leave the webinar open for a few minutes here. If anyone has any questions for me, I'm also going to just put in the message window here the training email address, so that if anyone has any questions for us or anything like that, you can shoot us an email. We'll get back to you. So like I said, I'll leave this open for a few minutes. If I have any questions, I'll answer them. If not, I will go ahead and close the webinar. I look forward to hearing from you guys. If you have any questions, shoot us an email. And if not, we'll see you guys next week for the next webinar. Thanks for showing up, guys.